All right. First off, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm honored and looking forward to sharing some of the knowledge that I have with you. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the most common cancer-related nutrition myths that I've encountered throughout my practice. A little bit about me. I've been a dietitian now working with cancer patients for about 5 years at St. Luke's Vincent Barty Cancer Clinic, specifically working more so with blood and bone cancers like leukemia or lymphoma. But I also do cover at a couple other clinics where I am encountering breast cancer patients and more solid organ tumors as well. So with that, let's get started here. Some of our goals for today is to, as mentioned, review and discuss some of the more common cancer-related nutrition myths, those being sugar and cancer, soy and cancer, and acidic foods versus alkaline foods and cancer. My goal is to try and walk through those with you and then identify what the actual recommendations are for preventing cancer via diet in the long run, and then helping you identify resources that once we're done today, you can rely on in order to get the most up-to-date and research-backed information, which is key. I'm not going to be, as a dietitian, we don't recommend anything that isn't backed by research. So let's start with the big one. I get this very, very often, that people are cutting out all carbohydrates. They're not eating any foods with sugar, even fruits, because they've heard or have been told by someone that sugar feeds cancer. And that is definitely misleading, right? So I'm not going to lie, sugar does feed cancer, but sugar also feeds every cell in your body. So if you were trying to rob the cancer of sugar, you would also be robbing your own cells of the nutrition that they need in order to thrive and survive. You'll kind of hear me using the terms glucose, sugar, and carbohydrates interchangeably, so I'm going to quick explain. Um, Glucose is sugar, and carbohydrates are long chains of glucose. Not all of them are created equal. There are your good carbohydrates and your bad carbohydrates. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about that. But saying that sugar feeds cancer, like I had mentioned, is misleading. This kind of developed, most sources say they believe it developed based on PET scans. With PET scans, we use a type of sugar that has this radioactive isotope attached to it, and it allows us to see where that is all going. And when you do have cancer, they're definitely using that sugar a lot more. And so you're going to see it light up on those PET scans. So with that, people assume that sugar is causing your cancer to grow out of control, which is not accurate. We have found throughout, research that cancer cells are very adaptable. And even if you were to cut out all the sugar from your diet, they will find a way to survive. And they do that through sometimes a process called gluconeogenesis. Glucose standing for glucose, neo for new, and genesis for creation. So, right, they're creating their own glucose. And they can do that either from fat, protein, they can even use ketones, which if you're familiar with the ketogenic diet, the whole point of that is to use ketones to fuel yourself. So cancer cells will survive even if you cut out all the sugar. As I had kind of alluded to a little earlier, though, not all sugars are equal. You have your naturally occurring sugars and you have your refined or added sugars. You could also call them your simple carbohydrates versus your more complex carbohydrates. And that definitely matters. Um, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that. One thing we don't do know though is that if you are eating a diet that is really rich in refined added sugars or simple carbohydrates, you are generally uh, increasing your caloric intake, which means you're likely going to be gaining weight, which does then put you at risk for cancer. Additionally, with that, you could develop diabetes, which is also another risk factor for cancers. So it really comes down to the type of carbohydrate that you're going to be eating. As I had mentioned, simple versus complex. If you look at the screen here, on the left, we have your very simple carbohydrates or refined grains, and then your complex grains on the right-hand side. Definitely want you eating more of the complex carbohydrates. Um, but kind of touching into the last subject, the ketogenic diet is popular, I would say, amongst people who are undergoing treatment, or it's often talked about. People have questions about it, which is fair. Leading into that, or I would not say leading into that, but because of the fact that people often assume that sugar is feeding their cancer. So kind of talking a little bit about what the ketogenic diet is, it's very low carbohydrate, very high in protein and fat, trying to push your body into a state of ketosis where you're using ketones as energy instead. But as we know, now that cancer cells don't purely rely on sugar, they can also use ketones. They can use protein, they can use fat to get the energy that they need. And right now, there's only a limited amount of research, high quality research, that suggests that a ketogenic diet could be beneficial for people with cancer. And with that, it's really only for a specific type of cancer. The most well-studied version is something called glioblastoma, which is a brain tumor. There have been a little bit of promising small-scale studies showing that the ketogenic diet could have helped with that. Um, Oftentimes, though, I tend to recommend people avoid it for the fact that you are going to be missing out on a lot of key nutrients. Whole grains provide you with a great source of fiber. Fiber is linked to prevention of colorectal cancers, so super important. Losing a lot of vitamins, minerals, and also antioxidants. Antioxidants are super important to help prevent cancer as well. So oftentimes it's not getting rid of all your carbohydrates, it is how much you're eating and what type you're eating. The next myth that I get fairly common is that eating soy increases your risk of breast cancer. This is purely a myth. Nothing really to debate here with this one. In fact, a lot of research shows that eating more soy has protective benefits against cancer. This myth came about because of the fact that we know certain breast cancers are estrogen linked, meaning that they kind of utilize estrogen to grow and expand. But soy doesn't contain estrogen. It contains something called phytoestrogen, which is totally different. It works totally different in the human body. We also know that soy is a great product for plant-based protein, great for fiber, also has a great amount of antioxidants in it as well. So including soy in your diet in moderation is shown to be pretty helpful in preventing cancer. So this myth, like I mentioned, is very false. It is important to note, though, that a lot of the research that surrounds soy is looking at whole foods, right? So it's looking at tofu, edamame, tempeh, not really your processed form of soy, like soy protein powders or even soy milk, which could have added sugar and things like that in it. So important to detail that. Next, we have the alkaline diet. This is another common one that I see. Um, Pretty much saying that if you focus on increasing the amount of alkaline forming foods in your diet, you are able to change your body's pH in order to make it a less friendly environment for cancer to develop. And with this diet, it is also a myth. Um, we have evidence that cancer cells do grow better in acidic environments, but all of these tests have been done outside the human body in petri dishes or in lab conditions. So it's important not to then apply that one-to-one to the human body because the human body is a lot more complex and it's got a lot more going on. So the theory with this diet was that if you're eating alkaline diet, which we can see if we actually go back, not a bad diet to eat at all. A lot of fresh fruits, a lot of veggies, some nuts. Um, and here again, seeing legumes being about 80% of your diet, that's a pretty good diet, right? However, it's misleading. To say that it can change the pH of your body is false. It's not able to do that. Your pH in your blood is very tightly regulated to, I want to say 7.45 on the pH scale. And pH goes from 1 being very acidic to 10 being very basic. So we want to be a little bit more on the basic side. But if you go too far in one direction or too far in the other direction, it can be very dangerous. Oftentimes you will end up being in the ICU for something like that, or the intensive care unit. So we want our pH to be stable. We don't want to try pushing it one way or the other. Um, you know, that could be potentially very dangerous. But one thing you'll notice amongst the alkaline diet and what we actually recommend is the fact that it is heavily plant-based. Based on what we know right now, a plant-based diet focused in a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, lean protein like chicken, fish, uh, turkey, eggs, soy, uh, green garden peas, and then keeping your processed meats like bacon, deli meats, sausage, things like that, your fattier red meats in moderation. This, type of diet has shown to be very impactful to, and I don't even like to call it a diet necessarily. It's more of a lifestyle change. But this is what is shown to be the most effective at preventing cancer. Um, Dairy, if you're going to have it, opt for fat-free or low fat. And as we had kind of talked about earlier, keeping your added sugars or refined sugars to a minimum. Everything in moderation, I always like to say. So I'm not going to tell you that you can't ever have a piece of birthday cake on your birthday, right? That's not feasible or not sustainable. And I'm, of course, always trying to be physically active. However you can, physical activity is really important, as well as avoiding alcohol or limiting your alcohol consumption can drastically cut back your likelihood for certain cancers. That, if you're interested in learning some more reliable sources, these are ones that I would lean on. They're going to be the most research backed and the most up to date. Otherwise, you are welcome to send me any emails that you might have. I'm happy to address those. Otherwise, if you're hoping to schedule an appointment with a dietitian one-on-one in person, I would recommend reaching out to your primary care physician and see if you could get a consult for a dietitian evaluation. With that, I want to just show you my references and thank you for, again, allowing me to present to y'all.